Well, good morning. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend those respects to all First Nations people gathered here today. As we look ahead to a net zero future, we recognize First Nations leadership as playing an integral role in achieving this in a just and sustainable way. Earlier this year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, published the most comprehensive review of knowledge on climate change yet. This report tells us that while some progress is made, there is an extraordinary gap between the trajectory that we're on and where we need to be to limit climate harm. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, calls the findings in this IPCC report a code red for humanity. Think about it. A code red for humanity. The good news is twofold. One, if we act with urgency, and I mean in the next few years, not in the next decade, not in the next 20 years, then we have a chance of avoiding the worst impacts of climate change. And two, we actually have the vast majority of the solutions and technologies that we need. We also know that the financial sector has a critical role to play in achieving climate action. And there's a number of initiatives like the Science-Based Target Initiative, the Net Zero Banking Initiative, and others that help financial institutions and others set net zero targets and ensure that they're done in a credible and a transparent way. This year, the Science-Based Target Initiative has been working on providing guidance on alignment with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures with science-based targets. So these are two critical global frameworks on how organizations work towards defining their climate impacts, defining their goals, and working towards that. And it's really, really important that there's alignment between them. Just a little bit of checking. How many people have heard of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD? A lot of people. How many people are actually working on implementing the TCFD? Okay, a few less, but still a lot of people, which is great. It's not the sexiest kind of framework to really work through and think about. But for those who are not that familiar, the TCFD is a way for organizations to determine the impact that they have on climate change and the likely impact that climate change will have on them through the lens of governance, strategy, risk management, as well as metrics and targets. So a number of countries are introducing mandatory disclosures of climate disclosures using TCFD reporting, starting with New Zealand from 2023, with the largest 200 institutions being required to do that. I think the UK has from 2025. There's also other countries around the world that are working on this. Australia, so far, does not have mandatory TCFD reporting, although our regulators say it is best practice and we should be using it. And the Investor Group on Climate Change has advocated for it to become mandatory in Australia. Ultimately, global regulators are looking to drive climate disclosures through the business community, starting with the financial sector, using this Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures as the key framework. So it's an important thing that will evolve over time. Now, when you look around the world at who is setting net zero targets, most people have a target of net zero by 2050, right? 2050, that seems to be the standard in terms of targets. As a bank owned by customers who are committed to climate action, we've set a target to reach net zero emissions by 2035. Why 2035? Well, given Australia's high emissions, our wealth, and our enormous potential for renewable energy, we know that reaching net zero by 2050 isn't going to be good enough to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees, let alone 1.5 degrees. We recognize that given our customer ownership structure as a mutual, and the fact that our customers want us to act on climate change, we're in a unique position to take a leadership role and to set an ambitious 2035 target. We can move faster than others because of our value proposition to our customers and our governance structure. So by doing so, hopefully, we can demonstrate that it's possible, de-risk those decarbonization pathways, and encourage others to move faster. Is 2035 achievable, though? Well, fortunately for us, we're not in a position of having to work through any fossil fuel lending in our portfolio, thanks to our responsible banking policy. And added to that, the majority of our emissions are in our mortgage portfolio, so people's home loans, and so we can focus on how we address that. If we take a step back and look at Australia's greenhouse gas emissions, we can see where we collectively need to focus and where it makes sense for Bank Australia, as a largely retail with a business kind of lens, needs to focus, which is really on decarbonising homes and vehicles. Residential buildings and private vehicles are both major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions in Australia. The good news is that we have the technologies available to decarbonise them rapidly. Residential buildings make up 12% of total carbon emissions and around 24% of overall electricity use. Electrifying homes, getting them off gas, and improving energy efficiency are all things that we all know how to do now. Transport makes up almost 19% of emissions, and of that, over half is passenger vehicles. So moving to EVs will make a significant contribution to decarbonizing our transport system. Now, if we go to Bank Australia's contributions to these emissions, over the past year, we've been working through what is our baseline in terms of our own emissions. For banks, we call this financed emissions. And it gives us the starting point to figure out, well, if this is where we start from, what do we need to do to get to net zero by 2035? For us, our financed emissions, as I mentioned, are largely in our mortgage portfolio. And so while emissions from an individual home may not seem like much, if you add them all together, for us, that's over 70,000 tons of carbon a year, which is a lot. So it's clear for us that our number one priority has to be supporting our customers to decarbonize their homes. Now, some of our customers' emissions are decreasing as a result of the decarbonization of the electricity grid, which is fantastic. And that's really critical that that continues. We're also pleased that the government has committed $20 billion to upgrade the electricity grid to support more renewables. But given that we have a 2030 target and not a 2050 target, we can't just sit back and wait for the electricity grid to decarbonize. It's not going to be good enough to get to net zero by 2035. So we launched our Clean Energy Home Loan a little over 2 years ago with an initial investment from the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. This Clean Energy Home Loan rewards customers with an interest rate discount if they are buying or building a new green home or making ambitious green upgrades to existing homes. Since introducing this Clean Energy Home Loan 2 years ago, it now makes up around 2% of our mortgage book, which is great. 2% is better than nothing, but wow, do we need to go faster to get to net zero by 2035. So, and also in those 2 years, we've also seen other lenders introduce clean energy home loans, which is great, including 2 of the Big 4 banks. And for us, that's a measure of success because it means that we can collectively drive impact faster. But there's still a lot of work to be done to upgrade existing homes, kind of improving energy efficiency, looking to renewables where it makes sense, and getting people off gas. So 100% electrification of homes. There's also an important opportunity in equity for communities, bringing household energy costs down at this moment in time. That's really critical, and it will continue to be critical for a long time from now, and improving health outcomes. The key to all of this is information, data, and making it easy for people to know what to do and to be able to take action. Transport is another critical issue and critical sector that needs to decarbonize. From a Bank Australia perspective, we've been working on this for a while now. We've provided offsets for car loans since 2004 and a low emissions vehicle loan since 2018. Given this, we recently made a decision to stop providing car loans to new fossil fuel vehicles from 2025. We felt that the responsible thing for us to do as a bank was to ensure that our vehicle lending wasn't locking our customers into higher carbon emissions or increasingly expensive running costs. So why 2025 in this instance? Well, as we flagged, we need to move as fast as we can in the sectors that we can, where there's available technology. And EVs is a technology that's ready to go now. In fact, this technology has taken over all over the world, and globally, EV sales are now at 10% of new car sales. And that can get as high as 72% in Norway, which is really quite phenomenal. While I think it's around 3.4% of new car sales now in Australia are EVs, our biggest challenge is not a lack of demand, but supply. In fact, if everybody that was on a wait list to get an EV was actually able to obtain one, we'd be at around 6% of new car sales, which gets us to that tipping point of between 5 and 10% of the market where the market accelerates and that transition happens fast. So the problem is supply, okay? The key to unlocking supply is for the government to put in place strong fuel efficiency standards. We are the only OECD country that doesn't have fuel efficiency standards. Okay? That means that the signal we're sending to car manufacturers all over the world is, hey, we're a dumping ground for ICE or internal combustion engine cars, and we're happy to do that as the rest of the world transitions to EVs. So, fortunately, the government currently has a national EV strategy out for consultation right now. So if you want to voice your support for EVs or for fuel efficiency standards, you might want to make a submission by the 31st of October, and really just look for the National Electric Vehicle Strategy Consultation page. It's the first thing that pops up. It's really easy to find. So once we have ambitious fuel efficiency standards, car manufacturers will need to send more EVs to Australia, giving us more model choice availability, and that will bring prices down. Of course, even with competitive pricing, we realize that not everyone will be able to afford an EV. So we see a role for second-hand fossil fuel cars for a few years until the transition normalizes. The key to stopping this carbon emissions is to stop new fossil fuels from getting into this, fossil fuel cars from getting into the system. And finally, for this mobility transition, we need to think beyond cars to a broader discussion around how people get along. We need to think, while the role of EV cars, passenger vehicles will continue to be important, we need to think about accessible active transport options, like making walking easier, bicycling, e-bikes, as well as electrifying public transport. Another contribution we make at Bank Australia is to support businesses who are providing climate solutions to decarbonize for decarbonized homes, green buildings, mobility, energy solutions. And we're currently funding organizations that are building green homes, knowing that more examples of density done well is the key to sustainable cities in the future. As part of our climate strategy, we're now looking at how we can expand our climate-focused lending to support businesses scaling up solutions. I just want to talk really briefly around the net part of this discussion around net zero, okay? So the role of offsets will be important in the transition. It won't be smooth, and there will be some sectors for which we're going to need to have offsets. But our default position should not depend on offsets. If everyone chose the pathway of offsets, we wouldn't have enough offsets. And there wouldn't be enough land or water available to meet that need. So we all need to do the hard work of avoiding emissions in the first instance and reducing what we can before jumping to offsets. Importantly, a couple more things to talk about. Importantly, we know that climate action isn't just about emissions reductions, but how we act on climate is about justice, both for the communities on the front lines of climate impacts, as well as the energy transition, as well as the need to seek guidance and leadership from First Nations voices. We share the understanding that First Nations leadership is critical to a safe climate future. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities have been caring for country for tens of thousands of years and are at the forefront of the climate movement. Bank Australia has recently announced a partnership with SEED to help amplify young First Nations voices and to support their leadership on climate justice. SEED was founded in 2014 as part of the Australian Youth Climate Network, and in 2021 became an independent grassroots network. SEED provides training and mentoring and opportunities to empower young First Nations people to build their skills, confidence, and networks to lead climate justice campaigns. SEED recently launched its Heal Country Declaration, a powerful call to action from First Nations young people fighting for climate justice. If you haven't taken a look already and understood and reflected on the Heal Country Declaration, I encourage you to do so. The website is right there, probably behind me, unfortunately. And while you're there, I highly encourage watching a short, powerful film called Water is Life. And you can look at other ways that you can support these activities. Last but not least, we need to ensure that in our ambition to reach net zero targets, we don't forget about the impact of climate change that we have collectively already baked in, and how these impacts are hitting our most vulnerable first and hardest. We need to ensure that everything we do to get to net zero, we're also thinking about how we strengthen people's resilience and enable everyone to adapt to a world which is already in a changed climate. We're just beginning to learn and work through what this means and what this looks like, but there are lessons to be learned from the catastrophic bushfires and the floods that we've been experiencing over the past few years. And we need to think about the changes we can make to future-proof our homes, our businesses, and our communities. So in terms of the race to net zero, we know that 2050 is too late, okay? We have to accelerate collective action. At Bank Australia, we take this challenge seriously, and we have ambitious targets to maximize action on behalf of our customers. While individual action alone won't solve the challenges that we're facing, together we can demonstrate what is possible, and in so doing, raise the level of ambition for all. Thank you.